Hello, Bible readers. Chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation include 7 messages to 7 churches. And I said this in an earlier post, but I'll say it again. These 2 chapters are part of a very closely held together unit. Chapters 1 through 3 can't be sliced and diced. No one of these messages can be separated from the other 6 either. Professor Boring also makes this point. These 7 messages, they're less otherworldly than what's about to come starting in chapter 4. You could say that chapters 2 and 3 are more down to earth because they reflect the particular geographical and cultural religious situations of particular places. He says, Revelation addresses the real world of church life, its glories and problems, before launching into the visionary, transcendent world of the later chapters. It's kind of like these messages to the 7 churches ground Revelation in some things that are heard and seen and known by the listeners of the day before he stretches the down-to-earth stuff up into heaven. So as you read these 2 chapters, you start to notice the form is pretty repetitive, methodical. Each is addressed to an angel. And this is what I mean by John slowly stretching listeners from the issues of their current day and this world into the heavenly places. In the apocalyptic tradition, earthly realities have counterparts in the heavenly world. A church or a nation has a guardian angel, for example, and as much as a heavenly angel concerns theirself with a church on earth is participating in a project sourced in heaven. There is an interconnectedness here. Lines are already getting blurry, and that's, of course, what John is trying to do for us, is to take us from where we are into something else that is. Right after addressing the angel of the church, we then hear the name of the city for that message. Ephesus was the capital of the province called Asia. Pergamum and Smyrna, they're competing with the Ephesians to be known as the first city of Asia. And remember, these 7 churches represent all the churches in Asia. 7 is the symbolic number of completeness. Remember, that's how many days it takes to create, including a day of rest. Kind of like 7 being completeness is kind of like the 7 rivers region. It denotes a total area, not just 7 parts of an area. And why do these 7 cities get highlighted? I found this to be interesting. Boring wonders whether maybe because they're all connected by the main Roman road at 30 to 40 mile intervals. I don't think that's coincidence. I think it would be like saying, like if we were to describe an area as people from La Crosse, for those who are watching that are from the La Crosse area, we might say, the region of La Crosse, Winona, Wabasha, Red Wing, St. Paul, like those are the 5 cities north of La Crosse. Well, am I ignoring Lake City? Am I ignoring Hastings? Like if they read a letter addressed to those 5 cities along the Mississippi River, would they feel like the letter is not written to them? So like these 7 cities in Revelation, there were other places that would have had Christian churches, and they would understand this is our area. These 7 cities that are named, that are so equally distant from each other, they also have something else in common. They also each have a Roman law court where a Christian could be charged with being subversive against the emperor, as Caesar was expected to be your God and you are to worship him. So that may explain why these 7. And the other thing to note is that Revelation is written to churches in cities. By the end of the 1st century, Christianity is an urban thing. The people of John's churches are not country bumpkins. They are in the principal cities of their time. Revelation challenges its listeners to consider, as city people, are you following the ways of Babylon or the New Jerusalem? Choose wisely. It's a message to cities, using cities as an example of good or evil. Another part of John's formula as he writes to the angel of the church in, enter city name here, these are the words of, is the next thing we hear in every message. John is doing like Old Testament prophets did. They would say, thus says the Lord, as a way to say, not me. These aren't my words. These are God's words. A prophet is no reporter in the Old Testament. A prophet is a mouthpiece, and John fully embraces this, using the first person when telling us words of Jesus. And right after telling us that these are not his own words, but are to be heard as Christ's words, we hear John ascribe the words to Christ as the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the golden lampstands, for example. And then the ascription changes with every message to every church, right? These are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. The words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. Most of these ascriptions are callbacks to chapter 1, when John was describing Christ. And it's smart, right, to ground all these ethical instructions and warnings, like do this, don't do that. He grounds all of it in the identity of Christ, the one who holds the 7 stars in his hand. And what are the first words of the one whose words these are? The same 2 words every time. I know. Whether it's coming from a place of threat or reassurance, Christ says, I know, which is on brand for the all-knowing, all-powerful God who's reaching into this moment to bring these messages. And then after the I know of each message comes the unique portion of each message to each church. There may be praise or blame or both. There may be promise or threat or both. Only Smyrna and Philadelphia come out smelling only like a rose, right? And then each message comes to a close with something like, let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying. And to be clear, this isn't just about listening, for comprehension. This is about listening in order to act, because it's almost always followed up with, and to everyone who conquers. So if you listened, well, then you conquer. And that's not about conquering inattentiveness or boredom. Like, well, you were able to listen, good job. It's about conquering through persistence, conquering the challenges that keep us from overcoming whatever challenge there is. There's a lot more to say, of course, about the body of each message to each church, but I'm only going to touch on a couple more things. John uses the word tribulation as a stand-in for how we might describe the ways of a sinful world. Like, tribulation is not a reference to some one-time spectacular future event. Tribulation is a constant context where a Christian is called to be a faithful witness to mercy and grace and truth in a world that rewards the opposite of those things. You could say we Christians are still in a time of tribulation. John is writing to people who have become outsiders to their own culture. There are Jewish synagogues who have become hostile to them. There are pagans who bring social and economic consequence on them. There is tribulation every day. Another big issue John addresses are the divisions in the church itself. Christian religious leaders will just show up and claim to be authorized messengers and missionaries and teachers of the true faith. Well, how can a church tell whether they are in fact that, or maybe they're not? And this is where a really essential, very important dynamic develops. In Christianity, a religious big shot, does not show up and declare, you're a proper church. You're a church who gets it. That is not how it works. Instead, a congregation determines whether the religious big shot is indeed a messenger sent from God or is not. Authority comes from the people of God, not one person of God. Following Jesus is a community activity where a community decides what is authentic Christian teaching and what is not. John, when he refers to the Nicolaitans, Balaam, Jezebel, those are two Old Testament references, he's saying, don't get suckered in, churches, to false prophets. And you can usually tell when they're false when they lead you away from Jesus dying on a cross for the sake of all. This becomes the criterion, because it's like, well, how can you tell, right? Well, Boring says, Jesus dying on a cross for the sake of all becomes the criterion for determining whether a teaching is true. That God's power, that God's glory, that they're shown through a sacrificial death for the sake of all. If your teaching takes us away from that core, the church needs to stay away. Stay clear from that. All right, in my next post, we're going to move from down to earth to the heavenly throne room. Read chapters 4 and 5, and in the post after that, I'm going to take a moment to discuss how to interpret Revelation's violent imagery. I hope you find it to be helpful. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.